chapter 6. We're going to be around it a little bit tonight. There's several different passages, but Matthew chapter 6 is where we're going to spend the bulk of our time. And before we get into the text, I want you to imagine something with me. Can you do that? Wow, are you there? Can you do that? Can you imagine something with me? Okay, all right. So I know it's Wednesday and everybody's tired and it's getting darker early and it's kind of chilly outside and you've probably found the comfortable groove in your seat and all that kind of stuff. But I'm going to ask you to use your imagination. And this is what I want you to imagine. I want you to imagine that every single day somebody deposits $86,400 in your bank account. $86,400 every single day. At the stroke of midnight, it automatically goes into your bank account. Now, there's one catch. The catch is you have to spend it all. There's no carryovers. If you don't spend it by the end of the day, if there's anything in your account at 11:59 and 59 seconds, it gets deleted. So you gotta use it, or literally you will lose it. But you know that every day at the stroke of midnight, you get another $86,400. Now, how many of you think you could figure out how to spend that much money? All right, how many of you have already started thinking in your mind, like, this is where I know, like, you've already got a head start on it. Here's the thing. Every single day at the stroke of midnight, somebody deposits 86,400 seconds in your life. That's how many seconds there are in a day. And every single day, you get a new batch of seconds. The catch is, you got to spend them all. There are no carryovers. You don't get to the end of your day and say, oh, well, I still have a bunch of seconds left over that I didn't use, so I get to carry them over in tomorrow. Tomorrow you get the exact same amount. And so it's very important that we spend this time wisely. You get that time, you get 86,400 seconds, and you didn't do anything to deserve it. You didn't do anything to earn it. People who are really good and really nice and really good at time management don't earn more time than the rest of us. We all have the exact same amount. You can't earn it. It comes to you as a gift, and it is yours to spend. You get to choose. You get to decide, and you will be held accountable. You're responsible for what you do with your time, and at the end of time, when you stand before the maker of time, the giver of time, you will not be able to blame what you did or did not do with those seconds on anybody else. You're the one who's going to be responsible, and so you get to choose. And when you add all of those seconds together, what they add up to is a life. That's what you have at the end of your seconds. You look back on all that accumulated time. Some of it was well spent, and some of it was frittered away, and at the end, what you have is a life. My friend Kenneth Boa, you guys know Kenneth Boa and I have written books together, and he's a really good friend of mine. And Ken Boa wrote this in one of his books called Conform to His Image. I have it on the overhead. This is such a profound statement. He says, each of us has been given enough time to accomplish God's purposes for us on this planet. That's such a profound thought. Just sit with that for a second. Each of us has been given enough time to accomplish God's purposes for us on this planet. And yet, for many of us, we can attest to the truth of this statement. This is by Franklin Field, where Franklin Field said, the great dividing line between success and failure can be expressed in 5 words. I did not have time. We all have the same amount of time, and yet some of us feel like we don't have enough time. We live in these crazy times. We have more time-saving devices and less time than any other society ever. And if that's not upside down, I don't know what upside down is. We have such easy access to information, quick access to information, and things that used to take a day take 15 minutes now. Things that used to take a week take an afternoon. How long did it take for the early pioneers to ride in their wagons across the country? It took them months, and I can get on a plane, and in 5.5 hours I can be in San Francisco. Things that used to take an entire season of life now can be accomplished in a day or a week or an afternoon. And yet, we find ourselves overscheduled, hurried, worried, stressed out about so much stuff. And for most of us, this is just the truth. In a place like suburban Atlanta, for most of the people who come here on a Wednesday night, your greatest danger is not that you're going to wake up one morning and finally just denounce your faith. I doubt very seriously that anyone here is going to wake up tomorrow and shake your fist at God and say, I'm done with this. I never want anything more to do with God, Jesus, Bible, the church, prayer, worship, any of that kind of stuff. My fear is not that that's what you're going to end up doing. My fear is that people like us, good, respectable, well-intentioned people like us, will just allow ourselves to get so busy that we end up settling for a mediocre version of the faith. Calvin Miller, in his book, Into the Depths of God, talks about going on vacation. He and his wife and their college-aged son all went on vacation to the Great Barrier Reef together. And his son was a scuba diver. He and his wife snorkeled. And if you were to ask them, did you all go to the Great Barrier Reef, they would all say enthusiastically, yes. But the experience that they had was vastly different from the experience their son had. Because you can only see certain things at the surface, and then you see a whole different layer when you actually delve down into the depths of the ocean. And Calvin Miller draws a distinction there, and he says, most Christians, I fear, neglect to dive down deep into the depths of God and content themselves with just snorkeling around on the surface. And then we get together and we say, wow, we all had a great time at the Great Barrier Reef, didn't we? When very few of us have ever actually gone down and seen it from the depths. Jesus' call to our lives is to stop snorkeling, stop being content with just skimming the surface of God, and be willing to come down deep. And I think the reason why we are so content to just snorkel, Jesus accurately diagnosed it in Mark chapter 4. Jesus is telling a parable of the seed, and you guys know this. The farmer goes out and he sows his seed, and when Jesus is explaining what the parable means, this is what he says. In Mark chapter 4, verse 18, he says, others, like the seed sown among thorns, hear the word, and the word is this great message that the life you've always wanted is available to you right now. But the worries of this life, the deceitfulness of wealth, and the desires for other things come in and choke the word, making it unfruitful. The deceitfulness of wealth, the desires for other things, and just the cares, the worries, the stress of our world actually hinder us from entering into this life we say we've always wanted. And it seems crazy to me that throughout the course of church history, over the last 2,000 years, what the devil was not able to accomplish through poverty or through persecution, he's been able to accomplish with just busyness. We're just so busy that we can't really experience the life God has prepared for us. So tonight, we're going to start taking back our time. And I'll just confess right up front, tonight might be painful. It was painful for me to prepare. And it might be painful for some of us to hear. But it's necessary. Because you've got to be intentional with your time. Because this world, with its upside-down goggles that we talked about a couple of weeks ago, will try to force you into its mold of hyperactivity and stressed out, superficial relationships lived at a frantic, unlivable pace. Unless you're intentional about it, you'll just get caught up in that flow. And so perhaps the most countercultural thing Jesus ever taught is what we're going to look at tonight. This is in Matthew chapter 6. The last two paragraphs of this chapter in the Sermon on the Mount. This is what Jesus has to say. He says, therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life. We could just stop right there, couldn't we? Because, is anyone like, oh yeah, that's me. I don't worry about my life at all. He's just thrown the gauntlet down, okay? Do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you'll wear. Isn't life more important than food, and the body more important than clothes? Look at the birds of the air. They don't sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? And can any one of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your life? And why do you worry about clothes? See how the flowers of the field grow? They don't labor or spin. Yet I tell you that not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these. If that's how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, will he not much more clothe you, you of little faith? So don't worry, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or what shall we wear? For the pagans run after all these things. Your heavenly Father knows you need them. But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. Anyone here ready to say, I know how to put that into practice? Because I'll let you come up here and you can teach the rest of us. This has got to be one of the most countercultural statements Jesus ever made. How in the world do you put that into practice? Anybody find that intimidating or unrealistic? It's just me? No, I think it's all of it. I mean, this is hard stuff. Now, I will warn you that if you really do want to put this into practice in your life, that's not going to be accomplished by just tinkering with your current life. See, most of us, when we come to places like this to hear messages, or what we hope to hear at least, what we really want is, hey, could you give me a couple of really simple things that I could just kind of add to what I'm already doing in order to accomplish the things that I feel guilty for not doing? I don't want to make wholesale fundamental changes. I just want a couple of little add-ons. Could you just give me a few tips, something I could do in like 5 minutes a day, or 12 easy steps, or 7 short things that I can just give me a couple of tips, because I want my life to continue the way it is. I just want to add a couple of improvements, a couple little upgrades. Is that okay? And we would never say it that way, but I'm telling you, what Jesus calls us to in these 2 paragraphs will require wholesale, fundamental changes. And the first place you have to start is by saying this simple sentence: you have enough time. You ever hear somebody say, oh, not enough hours in the day? I just don't seem to have enough time to get everything done that I need to get done. The truth is, you do have enough time. You have enough time. And if you feel like you don't have enough time, the problem is not that you need more time. The problem is you need to do less. And that's a hard thing to stare down. But it's true. The truth of the matter is, you have 86,400 seconds. You have 168 hours a week. You have 525,600 minutes per year. By the way, that's the same amount of time that Bill Gates has, Stephen Hawking, Albert Einstein, George Washington Carver, Abraham Lincoln, Martin Luther, the Apostle Paul, and Jesus Christ. They seem to do pretty well. So if you don't have enough time, the problem is not that you don't have enough time. It's that you have too much stuff that you're trying to cram into a 24-hour container. Jesus comes, and he offers you the chance of a lifetime, the opportunity to use the time you've got to really live a life of security and purpose and meaning and value and freedom. And the question is, how badly do you want it? We talked about this before. Like, if you knew the one thing that stood between you and living this kind of life, of true intimacy with God and true intimacy with other people, if the one thing standing between you and that kind of life was your money, would you sell everything you have and give it away? If the one thing that stood between you and really experiencing the life God designed you for was your family, would you leave them? Now, the odds are you're probably not going to have to sell everything and give all your money to the poor. in order to follow Jesus. The odds are you're probably not going to have to leave your family in order to follow Jesus. But the odds are you probably are going to have to rearrange your calendar. And would you be willing to do that? Would you be willing to do less? To say no to certain things in order to say yes to God? And we say yes, but how much of our own personal status and our own kind of pride and our own ego is what keeps us running like crazy people doing all the things we're doing? I know somebody who's on a church staff, and she's an incredibly gifted person, very educated, very, very gifted at so many different things. Her problem is she does everything. She does everything, and as a result, she does nothing well. And you know what she ends up doing? She ends up hurting people. The very people she's supposed to be serving. You see the irony there? And why? Because so much of her own personal worth is wrapped up in being the person who everyone goes to. That makes me feel really important. And if I let go of that, if somebody else comes in, then where do I get my sense of value, my sense of worth from? Well, where are you supposed to be getting it from in the first place? It's not from what you do. It's from whose you are. Jesus comes along and he says, you've got one chance at this. You don't want to waste your one and only life on things that are actually getting in the way of you pursuing the life you're meant to live. Now, lots of people think, I would love to follow Jesus full time, but I've got these other obligations, you see? And Jesus says, you have one primary obligation. Your primary obligation is to seek God's kingdom. You seek that. And it's possible to do that while you're at work. It's possible to do that while you're with your family, while you're eating, working, playing, etc. But you're going to have to take control of your time, and you're going to have to spend your time wisely. And see, in these two paragraphs here, Jesus is establishing two different kinds of life. He's setting up a contrast between one kind of life and the other. One is sort of the standard operating procedure in this world, and the other is life arranged around pursuing God's kingdom. And there's one word that sort of typifies the lifestyle of this world, the standard operating procedure of this world. And it's a word that gets repeated several times in these two paragraphs. For example, look at this next slide. I just kind of lay it out for you. In verse 25, therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life. Verse 27, can any of you by worrying add a single hour? Verse 31, so do not worry. Verse 34, therefore do not worry. Anybody want to guess what the word is? Therefore, no, not therefore. The word is worry, clearly. Now, the word worry here can be translated anxious striving. Anxious striving. In other words, there's an emotional component to this: anxiety, fear, worry, stress. But there's also a behavioral component to this: striving, running, rushing, pushing, pulling. There's an emotional side and a behavioral side to this. And these are really your two options. You can live this kind of life, a life that is ultimately characterized by pushing and striving and reaching and grasping and being afraid and being stressed out, or you can pursue God's kingdom and trust that everything else will line up. And this is talked about over and over again throughout the Bible. For example, in the book of Ecclesiastes, in Ecclesiastes chapter 2, Solomon describes sort of life in this world this way. I picked up the only Bible without Ecclesiastes in it. Where is it? There we go. Okay. Ecclesiastes, this is the way he describes it. He says, what do people get for all the toil and anxious striving with which they labor under the sun? All their days, their work is grief and pain. Even at night, their minds do not rest. This too is meaningless. Does that sound familiar to any of you? For me personally, I live this too many times, where even at night, I cannot turn my brain off. I'm constantly going. That's one kind of life. Now, the Apostle Paul, you contrast that with what the Apostle Paul says in the letter to the church in Philippi. In Philippians chapter 4, he says this, "Do not be anxious about anything." And you can really read that more as an invitation than a command. Rather than saying, "Oh no, I can't be anxious," you can say, "Woohoo, I don't have to be anxious." Do not be anxious, he says, about anything. But in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Now, if you really understood that those are your two options, a life of anxiety and frustration, and even at night you can't turn your brain off, or a life where I don't have to be anxious about anything, instead, the peace that defies rationality will guard my heart and my mind. Those are your two options. Now, if you know those are your two options, is there any doubt in your mind which of those is the pearl of great price? Which of those is the treasure buried in a field? When you discover it, you're willing to go and sell whatever you have to sell in order to get it. That's a no-brainer. Now, back in Matthew, in the Sermon on the Mount, in the passage that we just looked at a second ago, Jesus describes the pagans, people who don't believe that there really is a God who is actively concerned with their lives. And this is how he describes the pagans. This is back in Matthew chapter 6 in verse 31. He says, "Don't worry, saying, 'What shall we eat?' or 'What shall we drink?' or 'What shall we wear?' Listen to this. For the pagans run after all these things." What do the pagans do? They run. Anybody living like a pagan? Boy, that describes me. I know what I want, and I'm going to run after it. I'm going to chase it down. I'm going to hunt it down. I'm going to run until I get it. That's how the pagans live. The pagans run after all these things. There was a story years and years ago out of Tacoma, Washington. A story of Tattoo the Basset Hound. Tattoo was a 7-month-old basset hound who did not intend to go for a run that day, but his owner took him out for a walk, came back in, and somehow or other slammed the car door on the leash of Tattoo the Basset Hound. And then the car started to back out of the driveway, and of course, Tattoo had to follow, and then the car took off down the street. And it got out of the neighborhood, and they passed a police officer who noticed something was dragging along behind this car. And so the police officer, the car actually got up to about 25 miles an hour, and this poor basset hound is just picking him up and putting him down as fast as he can, trying to keep up. Rolled over a couple of times. Finally, the police officer caught up with him, put on the blue lights, and they pulled over. And they turned around and looked at poor Tattoo and started calling to Tattoo. They were just distraught over what had happened. And the basset hound didn't appear to be injured at all. But that really is a great illustration for how so many of us feel every morning when we get up. How many of you feel like every morning you get up and somebody slams your leash in a car door and takes off down the road? And I've just got to pick them up and put them down as fast as I can just to keep up, just to keep from being left behind, to keep from being injured. That's what the pagans do, according to Jesus. Too many of us, too many of the people sitting in this room, that characterizes us. We run like pagans. And who does it end up damaging? The people we love the most. Because they end up getting our leftovers. We're too tired from all the work we've done ostensibly for them. We're so exhausted from working overtime, from having to travel as much as we travel, from having to commute as far as we commute, from having to do all the stuff that we're supposedly doing for them, that we can't even give them time and energy and attention. And they end up getting cheated. And there's so many stories over and over again in the media about how exhausted we are as a nation. Technology was supposed to make life easier, but it didn't. It just made it busier. How many people are diagnosed with sleep disorders? We just have this tremendous lack of margin. Another writer named Lewis Grant talked about a mysterious illness that he used to diagnose in people called sunset fatigue, where you just get, by the time the sun is going down, you're just exhausted, you're just done. And these are some symptoms. I have some symptoms up on the screen for sunset fatigue. Here's a symptom. Symptom number 1, you're always in a hurry. Whether there's a reason to rush or not, you are rushing. You ever catch it? Because hurry is addictive. You're rushing. Come on. You're not even in a hurry. Are we in a hurry to go somewhere? Sometimes Jill will ask me that. And I'm like, come on, let's go. Do we have to be there on time? Or is there some time we're supposed to be there? No, I'm just addicted to being in a hurry. You stage mock races with your kids. Anybody ever do that? Come on, let's see who can be in bed the first. Why? I don't know. Just because it's good to get you in practice to be a neurotic grown-up like me. Is that what that's about? You start things and you don't finish them because there's just not enough time. You have this sense that time is passing too quickly. The kids are growing up and you're missing it. You're missing out on something because life is just a blur. Or maybe this is you. You understand what I'm talking about and you just want to get on with the next message. Any of you feel like one of these could describe you? I think most of this could describe most of us. We suffer from this weird, mysterious ailment that has confused us. And in order for you to really live life in God's kingdom, you have to realize this. You have enough time. You have just enough time. Yeah, Larry. Can I hurry up? Yeah, I know. People are thinking, come on, Lost is going to start at 9 o'clock, the World Series, whatever, The truth is, you have enough time. You don't need more time. You probably need to do less. But in our society, we wear busyness as a badge of honor, don't we? To be busy is to be important. Look at verse 25 of Matthew 6. Jesus says, don't worry about your life, what you'll eat or drink, or about your body, what you'll wear. Isn't life more important than food, and the body more important than clothes? And then he draws this great illustration. He says, look at the birds of the air. They don't sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. There are no type A birds. That's kind of what he's saying here. And as a result, there is a very low occurrence of stress-related illnesses in the bird community. They don't suffer from colitis. They don't have hypertension. They don't have heart disease. There is no anxious striving among the birds, and yet they do all right. They still manage. Why? Is it some sort of accident that birds continue to survive? Is it some sort of something that's built into the design of the universe that keeps birds being self-sustaining? Is that what does it? No. What is it? There is an all-powerful God who loves them and takes care of them. That's why. Now, verse 27. He says, can any of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your life? It's kind of ironic that the answer to that is no, but what we found out subsequently is you can subtract hours from your life by worrying, can't you? That's the irony there. Verse 28, and why do you worry about your clothes? Now he switches from the birds to the flowers. See how the flowers of the field grow? They don't labor or spin. By the way, when you plant flowers, where do you plant them? In a flower bed. Not a flower racetrack, not a flower treadmill, not a flower office park. Where do flowers grow? In the bed. We'll talk about that in a little bit more in a little bit, but let me say this. This is not about being lazy or unproductive, okay? This is about how much you trust God. Because these two different lifestyles really do come down to that. Who do you trust? And how much do you trust it? Do I trust God enough so that I will make it a priority to seek His kingdom? That when push comes to shove, and I'm being pushed and pulled in two separate directions, one direction is my relationships with other people, and the other relationship is working overtime at the office, who's going to win? Do I really trust God enough to seek His kingdom first, and trust that everything else will work out. That God will provide. And that if I don't get the promotion, or I don't get the raise, or I don't get the corner office, maybe I don't really need that. I mean, what's the worst thing that could happen? Well, the worst thing that could happen if you cheat your family is you will have no more family. And I don't know anybody who wants to choose that. But the worst thing that could happen if you cheat your work is you don't have a job. And if I have to choose between not having a job and not having a family, guess which one I'm choosing? And I wish everybody could say that. But not everybody does. Some people, when forced to choose between not having a family and not having a job, choose their job. I don't know that they actually kind of sat down and did a cost-benefit analysis or whatever, but if you just allow yourself to drift, that's where you will end up. Because that's where our society will take you. Do I really trust God to provide for me when I do what I know I should do? Verse 30. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, will he not much more clothe you, you of little faith? The grass is disposable. You're not. Now, when we talk about this, part of the danger of even approaching this topic is that some of you are by nature worriers. And when you tell a worrier, stop worrying, what do? They worry about how much they're worrying. And so that's really sort of the conundrum that we're in. So when you hear this, it might be helpful for you to think of tonight as an invitation, as opposed to another assignment. Oh dear, something else I got to do. I can't worry, I can't worry, I can't worry. Maybe you need to think about it as, I don't have to worry. That might be beneficial for you to just sort of reframe it. I don't have to worry. Jesus invites us to just reflect on how God cares for the world. Just look at the world around you. You know, right now, lots of trees are losing lots of leaves. But don't worry, they'll come back. They always do. It's very beautiful right now. And I imagine it's beautiful to everybody except the trees. Because you know what the trees are thinking? I'm dying. But don't worry, they'll come back. They always do. When you look at the trees, you can be reminded that God always brings it back. When you look at the birds and you see the birds eating, you can be reminded, God cares more for me than he does for birds, and so he must be willing to provide for me if he has provided for the birds. When you look at the flowers, you can be reminded that God is amazingly creative and that he loves variety, but you can also be reminded that God cares for these flowers and he cares for me even more. When you look at nature and see how God provides for his creation, that can be a trigger for you. He cares more for you than for all the birds and all the flowers and all the grass on the face of the earth. And you just think on that. Think on it until it becomes real. And then sort of adjust your life accordingly. Now, sometimes it's not going to really become real for you until you obey Jesus. Until you begin to rearrange your life and live as if it were so. And I wonder, what if we all just decided to stop? I mean, what if every single one of us here tonight decided, tomorrow we're not going to run like the pagans? Well, you can't run anymore because you're sore and everything. But what if we all just decided, that's it, we're done. We're hopping off the treadmill. What if we all went home tonight, stood in our driveway, looked at all of our neighbors who have better stuff parked in their driveways, and just said as loudly as we could, you win. You win. I'm not trying to keep up with you anymore. No more competition. No more. You win. And we all stepped out. So we're not going to run anymore. What would happen? You know what? I bet you'd find out that God really can be trusted. But if you don't decide odds are you'll never really know. Not really. Not for sure. There really is a God, and He really is powerful, and He really does love you, and He really does want to provide for you, and He really has purchased for you the greatest life you could ever imagine living, and He extends an invitation to absolutely every single one of us. And He says, all who will, whosoever will, may come. And He really does mean that. And what keeps us out of the kingdom of God? Is it really our busyness? Well, I meant to get around to serving other people, but you see, it's fantasy football league season, and so that takes up so much of my time. I really did want to read my Bible more, but Lost just started, and I cannot miss a single episode, because if I do, then I won't have anything to talk about at the office the next day. I really did mean to spend more time cultivating deep relationships with the people who matter the most to me, but I've just got so much going on at work. Are we really going to allow our busyness to keep us from the life God created us to live? See, our calling now is to live as if this were so, to obey this gospel by adjusting our lives and living as if this really were the case, that God really does love us and really is prepared to provide for us the way He provides for the birds and the flowers and the grass. And this means I'm going to have to adjust my pace. Now, some of us will still move faster than others because we're all wired differently. And some of you are married to people who are so fast-paced. They love to finish your sentences. Anybody been married to people who have sort of the spiritual gift of sentence completion? Some of us move faster than others, just sort of naturally. We're all wired differently, and some of us are more wired than others, just naturally, okay? But this is the key right here. Look at this. This is the key. How slow do I need to go in order to love God and other people better? That's the question you got to ask yourself. How slow do I need to go in order to love God and other people better than I do right now? And for some of you, again, there's no one pace fits all. It's going to take discernment, and it's going to take community. This is something that needs to be resolved in the context of some trusted relationships, where you go to them and you say, is the pace of my life damaging our ability to really connect? Because the truth is, you may think that one pace is acceptable, and your spouse may think not so. And so it's important for you to get clarity on this. And the best way to get clarity is to ask some people you know and trust and respect. And let me say this, do not go and talk to somebody whose life is a mess. They cannot be trusted. And the problem with that is, this is the problem with that. Lots of people in positions of leadership, their lives are a disaster. And you don't want to live like them. See, we have this tendency to think, and I'm saying this about me too. We have a tendency to think that because somebody is good up here, they're necessarily good at life, and that's not the case. Just because someone's a really good talker doesn't mean they're a real good liver. Okay? And if you want advice, by all means, go and ask somebody who's a really good talker. But if you want somebody to point something out in your life and give you a way of living that will lead you to a better, saner existence, don't necessarily go and talk to somebody just because they're the upfront person. Because frequently, the person up front, his life is a mess. Go and ask somebody you know, somebody you trust, somebody whose pace of life you admire, somebody who has deep relationships, somebody who makes you feel valued. Go and ask them. How slowly do I need to go in order to love God and other people better than I do now? If your current pace is working for you, then by all means, keep at it. But be honest and ask others. Now, I want to sort of finish up tonight by talking about some chunks of time that might need to be rearranged for you to really pursue this. And the first is, I just want you to think about the way you structure your days. Just think about your days. And where I want to start is I want to give you a piece of advice that you might not expect. But this is the first piece of advice right here. Get more sleep. Get more sleep. I read an article not too long ago that said sleep deficit in America makes the national debt pale in comparison. There was an article I read about a flight that overshot its destination by an hour and a half because all three of the people in the cockpit were asleep. That makes you feel secure, doesn't it? I'm sure glad I got to take my shoes off to get off this plane. Those guys are asleep up there. They only woke up because the ground crew had an alarm in the cockpit that they set off. And so the chirping woke them up. They were an hour and a half past where they were supposed to land. Sleep deficit is at an all-time high. The National Transportation Bureau says 200,000 traffic accidents every year are caused because people are just tired. People are exhausted behind the wheel. $16 billion of lost productivity as a result of people being exhausted. And that doesn't include catastrophic accidents. There was a survey done of parents of young children. They asked parents of young children, if you had 1 extra hour a day, what would you do with it? Number one answer, sleep. I would sleep. What does that say about us as a society? That if I were to give you 25 hours tomorrow, the one thing most of us would choose to do is sleep. Get more sleep. Hey, I've been given pop quizzes, so here, I got a pop quiz for this one, okay? Okay? All right, is everybody, okay, all right, here we go. Pop quiz. When you're tired, and you want to honor God, you want to live life in the kingdom, you're tired, what should you do? A, drink more coffee. You can even do that at Christian colleges. They don't even outlaw that, like at Lipscomb or Harding and places like that. You can drink all the coffee you want, all the time, all day long. All of the professors drink as much coffee as they possibly can. They don't smoke, they don't drink alcohol, but they drink lots and lots of coffee. Because that's good for you. This body's a temple. Drink more coffee. B, watch more TV. Especially late at night. I find that if you watch lots of television late at night, you wake up in the morning really refreshed. C, catch up on your sleep during John's Wednesday night class. Wait a second. Some of you were already doing that, weren't you? You've been busted. What's the answer? None of the above. All right, here's what you do. You trust God and you get more sleep. I'm tired. Go to bed. What's the worst thing that could happen? People aren't going to die if you go to bed unless you're a pilot. Then by all means, stay awake. But what's the worst thing that could happen? Do you think your life is that important that the sun's not going to come up tomorrow if you decide to go to bed at 10 o'clock? I got an email from somebody the other night. Somebody who works at a church sent me an email at midnight. I got up in the morning and I saw it and I said, did you really send me an email at midnight about a church thing? Why aren't you in bed? Why aren't you talking to your husband or doing something other than work? It's like an epidemic, isn't it? Trust God and go to bed early. The Bible, surprisingly enough, has a lot to say about sleep. For example, in the 3rd Psalm, this is what it says. Psalm 3, verse 5, I lie down and sleep, I wake again because the Lord sustains me. Not because my alarm clock awakens me. Not because I have things to do. Why is it that I'm able to lie down and sleep? Because God sustains me. The very next psalm, this is what it says, Psalm 4. In peace, I will lie down and sleep. Why? Because I accomplished everything on my to-do list today. No. For you alone, Lord, make me dwell in safety. Maybe the best thing you could do, the most God-honoring, Christ-following thing you could do tonight is go home and get a good night's sleep. Because the people around you will tell you, you're not very much like Jesus when you're tired. It's hard to be like Jesus. It's hard enough when you're well-rested. It's a lot easier when you got a good night's sleep. So when you're thinking of your daily life, first, get more sleep. Here's the second one. Pray more. And it doesn't have to be like a devoted time. I'm going to do my 1-hour prayer thing right now. It can be something really simple. Tonight, when you're going to bed early, you just sit with God for a minute. Just review your day. God, this is what happened today. And this is what hurt my feelings. And this is what made me feel really good. And you just sort of release. And then you ask God to restore you. Help me not just to sleep tonight, but to get some rest. You just spend a couple of minutes right before bed. And when you wake up tomorrow, just spend a couple of minutes and give Him your day. God, this is what I have today, and this is what I'm nervous about, and this is what I'm looking forward to. And surprise me today, God. See what happens. You just pray that for a while. Surprise me today, God. And when you're in the shower, ask God to wash your insides while you wash your outsides. Just real simple kind of things. When you're eating breakfast, ask Him to feed your body and your soul, or to feed your mind and your soul while you're feeding your body. And maybe you take one verse with you throughout the course of the day. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Just take that. Walk around with that all day. Or, behold what manner of love the Father has given unto us, that we should be called the sons and daughters of God, and that is what we are. That's 1 John 3:1. Just carry that around with you all day. Periodically review it in your mind. Every day, there are things you can do to rearrange your time. Maybe you might want to think about things to do every week. For example, once a week, you ought to, next slide here, gather with other Christians. And I don't mean in a place like this where you stare at the back of somebody else's head. Gather someplace where you sit around in a circle, you look each other in the face, and you talk about what's going on with your life. You ought to do that. You ought to make that a highlight for you every single week. I had somebody who got on to me not too long ago because my travel schedule doesn't allow me to regularly worship, in a local church on a Sunday morning. And I said, you're still thinking that Sunday morning is like the big woohoo highlight. For me, my small group, that's my highlight. For me, I don't feel like I miss church because I miss the gathering on Sunday morning. I feel like I miss church if I miss the time where we sit around in a room and talk about each other, talk about what's going on in our lives with each other. The problem is, the guy I had that conversation with is a preacher. You know why Sunday morning is so important? I was a preacher for years, so I can tell you. The reason why Sunday morning is important is because that's where we take up the money. There, I said it right out loud. It's so important that you gather together with other Christians and look each other in the face and actually do life together. Do it, make it part of your weekly routine. Make it part of what you do. Make it who you are. Gather together with other Christians. Here's another one. Where is it? Here we go. Take a day off. Once a week, take a day off. Just no more work today. Don't check your email. That's really hard for some of us, isn't it? And this is why this is so important to me. And this is one of the reasons why I'm really pushing hard today. I had a conversation with my oldest daughter not too long ago. It was bedtime, and I was up in her room, and we just prayed together, and we were talking about some things. She was having a hard time sleeping, and I asked her, Annabelle, what do you think is most important to Daddy? And she said, well, music. And I liked that. I have music a lot in the house, music playing frequently. Instead of watching television, a lot of times we'll have music in the background. So I was happy that she said that. She said another thing. She said books and reading, because I always have books and I'm always reading something. And I was fine with those two. My problem is that neither of those two were her first answer. Her first answer was email. When I asked my daughter what's most important to Daddy, her first response was email. That's wrong. Take a day where you don't check your email. Take a day where where the office can't get you. Unplug. Take a day a week. Here's some other things you might want to consider doing. As you rearrange, like what's your daily schedule, what's your weekly schedule? Maybe once a month you spend some time by yourself. Go off by yourself and just spend some time in quiet contemplation, in thought. Maybe that's what you do once a month. Maybe this is another thing. Maybe you should just goof off. Just take a time of holy goof off time. That's appropriate. And again, no one pace fits all. So you got to ask yourself, what does this look like for me? And this is going to be hard. But Jesus comes along and he says, here's your chance. This is your chance to live life in God's kingdom. This is your chance. So we've been saying this every week in here. Every week when we get to the end, we run through a couple of different scenarios and where we're going to be faced with a crossroads. We could choose to live this way or we could choose to live differently. And the thing that I frequently say, and that I've had you repeat over and over again, is when we get to that crossroad, you're not going to say this, you're going to say what? Here's my chance. That's right. Okay, so tonight, on your way out of the parking lot, some of you already have mapped out like your escape route. You know how you're going to leave, and you're going to run, and you're going to get in your car, which you have backed into a parking spot, and you know exactly how to get out of here without talking to anybody, because by all means, you know, something is going to start here soon on the television that you've got to be home to get, but you're not going to say that tonight. Tonight, you're going to say, here's my chance, and you're going to take a lap around the building, and you're going to talk to people. And you're going to take the long way home. And you're going to get behind somebody who is driving 45 miles an hour with their left turn blinker on, and you're going to be okay. This week, I guarantee you, sometime this week, you're going to get stuck in traffic on 400 because there is always traffic on 400. Sometimes even coming home from church, right? Okay, so you're going to get stuck in traffic, and somebody is going to be trying to merge. Like you're going to be just north of like exit 10, you know, where it always kind of backs up there, and somebody's going to be trying to merge, and this is what you're going to do. You're going to be tempted to avoid eye contact because you know that there's sort of an implied contract there that if we make eye contact, I have to let you in front of me. But if I don't see you, then I can cut you off, you see? And it's really important that I am one car length ahead, even though we're all creeping along at 15 miles an hour. Somehow or other, I think that one car length is going to make all the difference. You're going to be tempted to avoid eye contact, but instead you're going to say, here's my chance, and you're going to let that person in front of you, and it's going to be hard, but it's going to be good. This week, sometime, you're going to get an email at midnight. I guarantee it. Somebody in this room will get an email at midnight, and you're going to be tempted to go and read it. And then you're going to be tempted to respond to it. And it's going to be about work, and it's going to be midnight. But you're not going to do that. Instead, you're going to say, here's my chance. There was a lot less enthusiasm this week than there normally is. I noticed that. I was in Nashville a couple of weeks ago, and I was going to go to dinner with a friend of mine, and he knew where the restaurant was, and I didn't, and he had his car, I had mine, and so I was following him. And he's one of those guys who, I think I've talked about him before, a mutzel, a meticulous observer of the speed limit. And he drives, like if it's 45, he drives 44. And if it's 35, he drives 34. And if it's 25, he just doesn't go, you know, I mean. And so I'm supposed to follow him to the restaurant, and I caught myself wanting to get out and pass him. And this is what it occurred to me while I was doing it. I was beaten, you know, I was ready to go, and I really did want to get out and pass him. But the thing that kept me from passing him is this remembrance. If you're going to follow somebody, you can't go faster than they do. I had to go to school for a long time to learn that. If you want to follow someone, you cannot go faster than they do. And Jesus comes, and his invitation is what? Follow me. If you're going to follow Jesus, guess what? You can't go faster than he does. And Jesus very rarely hurries. Jesus went slow enough so that he could love the people around him. Now, he was frequently busy. He had a lot to accomplish. Sometimes he moved rapidly, but he never hurried to the point that he missed the people around him. Jesus never went faster than his relationship with his Father would allow. And that's the call for us. And can you imagine what it would look like for a group of 150 people to say, that's it, we're done. We're done rushing, we're done striving, we're done with the anxiety and the worry and the fear. And if it means we don't get the promotion at the end of the year, so be it, because I would rather be rich in relationships. And if it means that I don't have the big house, then I'm okay with that, because I'd rather have a healthy marriage. And if it means that I don't have all the status that this world likes to lavish upon us, I'm fine with that. Because the things this world deems important are frequently not the things that God esteems. Can you imagine what a community of people would look like? who made that kind of a commitment, who said, we will pursue God's kingdom and His righteousness manifested in our relationships first, and we will trust God to provide everything else we need. I really think that's possible. And I'd like to see it happen here. Let's stand for our closing prayer tonight. God, your call on our life is painful at times, and you are frustrating to follow. But follow you we will, because where else can we go? You alone have the answers. You alone know right side up from upside down. You alone have true wisdom. So God, as frustrating as it might be this week, I pray that you will do whatever it takes to slow us down to the point where we can love you with everything we have, and love each other, and love the world that you gave your Son to die for. Make us that kind of a community where status is not based on busyness, but where we pursue your righteousness above all else. That's our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. We'll see you next week.